So, hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. This webinar is called as a key to addressing ocean pollution. In fact, the scientific paper behind it has a slightly more complex topic, but I'll leave that to the authors in a minute. And that title actually starts telling a very interesting story about what we've learned about ocean pollution. It's a very substantial and comprehensive scientific paper. It has been embargoed until May 27th, 12 o'clock GMT, a moment ago. And so this is a big moment for the authors, and it's also a big moment for the community. And thanks all of you for joining them and us for this webinar. My name is Martin Stuchtey. I teach resource economics and I'm a founding partner of Systemic, and I was kindly asked to moderate this webinar, which I very happily accepted. So over the next 90 minutes that we will be spending together digitally, here's the run sheet. So first, I would quickly talk about how this paper came to life in the context of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. Then I would ask one of the HLP host countries, Japan, to quickly take the word, and I will introduce Excellency the Ambassador to you. Then I would ask the authors, the lead authors, Jenna and Ellie Moss, Jenna Jambeck and Ellie Moss, to present their findings. Afterwards, there will be a panel discussion, and we have very distinguished panel, and we will bring Brajesh Dubai and Simon Reddy into the conversation. That will take about 25 minutes. I'll be asking them questions, and then afterwards we have allowed for significant time, 30 minutes, for you to ask questions. There's a Q&A session, and if you don't have questions, I have quite a few of them. This is, after so many weeks of lockdown, we are all Zoom or WebEx champions now. Still, a quick reminder, if you want to ask questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So into that, would you please enter the questions, and then we make sure they're being entered into the conversation. And we also kindly ask you to direct the question to one of the speakers. So that makes it easier for us to keep the flow. Very quickly, the high-level ocean panel, it's a unique, and if you want, it's quite a unique initiative. It's about how to elevate the course of the ocean and how to massively accelerate actions on sustainable ocean management. Because, as you all know, this is in the absence of a global ocean government. And that's why 14 countries, 14 world leaders came together, and they created the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. It's headed or chaired by Norway and Palau. And whilst 14 countries doesn't sound a lot, they represent 20% of the global fishing fleet. They represent 20% of the global fishery catch, about a third of the global exclusive economic zones, and about a third of the world coastline. So this is quite a big part, a relevant part of the global ocean economy, and that is across all continents. The Ocean Panel has three fundamental objectives. The first one is really to revisit and to renew and to re-articulate the relationship, the contract that we as humanity have with the ocean, and to drive for a completely new paradigm in which we are using the ocean, which is protect, produce, and prosper, PPP, because the Commission deeply believes, the panel deeply believes, that you have to do all three things at the same time or you get it wrong. The second one is to be a nursery, a catalyzer, an impulse for bold and pragmatic ocean solutions across governance, technology, finance, and lastly, to connect the ocean agenda to the attainment of the SDGs more broadly, because this is not just about the ocean SDG. Every one of you knows that the ocean is important to reach every single one of the 70. So in the pursuit of those commitments to be credible, to be deep, to be up to date, the Ocean Panel has decided to invite scientists, and they've commissioned a series of 16 blue papers, comprehensive scientific papers, each one with the objective to provide the latest science and cutting-edge thinking on how science, technology, policy, government, and finance can be applied to really drive towards sustainable oceans. Probably this is unique. There are 204 authors that have been involved in the creation of those 16 blue papers, and they come from 42 countries across the world. So far, 8 of those blue papers have been launched. These launches will continue. You can choose to be a part of that and also of other digital HLP events. There will be, at the end of this, there will be the chance to sign up to notifications. If you feel that you want to understand everything that's relevant and that's up to date on oceans, it's those 16 blue papers that you would have to read, because it's trying to be the most comprehensive compendium of ocean knowledge to date. Today it's about ocean pollution, and I think we all understand that the whole age of throwing things away is coming to an end, because we are starting to find out that there is nothing such, no such thing as away. Damaging pollutants are starting to interfere with ecosystems, with plant health, animal health, planetary health, in a way that really reaches critical thresholds. And there's a growing awareness of that, and particularly around plastic. Plastic is the iconic material that woke us up and that completely changed over the last years our conversation of how our linear and single-use economic model is coming to its limitations. It's not just plastic, there are other pollutants, but plastic tells the story really well. And it's not only the plastic that we see, it's about 2 or 3% that we see, all the rest sits in the water column. And yet it has been able to arouse ourselves in a way, many people say this is almost the Tesla moment, because there is so much attention and concern, and also increasing emotion around the plastics theme. That's what today is about. Now I want to give the floor, or rather the screen, to a distinguished Ambassador Excellency Tamaki Tsukada. He is ambassador, but also the Director General for Global Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan. And I would like you, Tamaki Tsukada, to speak, and so the screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor Stuchtai. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. And thank you very much for that very kind introduction. On behalf of the high-level panel Sherpa team, I would like to express my thanks to the lead authors and the panelists, and of course to you, Professor Stuchtai, for moderating today's event, and also the public viewers who are participating from around the world. This high-level panel process, as far as I understand, is unprecedented in that we are systematically informed and aided by science and the science community. And this gives legitimacy and credence to the recommendation to be produced by the leaders. And we really appreciate the enormous amount of work that has been done to date through the multitude of streams of blue paper activities. I have the privilege to bear witness to the launch of the Blue Paper 5 on marine plastic pollution, which is a very important topic for Japan. And I'm very happy to say that because the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision last year on marine plastic litter was one of the key outcomes, which G20 was able to agree in Osaka, which carried time-bound specific targets. Some people said that at that time that we were not ambitious enough, but we believe achievable and realistic targets, which include all major polluters, are very important indeed. And speaking of plastics, with the onslaught of COVID-19, there is a surge in production and consumption of masks and protective equipments, which are all single-use plastic products. Without irony, there is a renewed realization of the importance and value of plastic, but that does not change the gravity of the plastic litter problem. And if anything, we think it is making more sense to adopt a life cycle approach. So we think innovation will be the key to re-engineer our economy to adopt this approach. And for example, a Japanese company recently developed a reusable face mask made of wood-based textile produced from thinned timber. Another spectacular innovation from a small regional company in Osaka is coming to the market, which will enable plastic waste to be reduced to fuel and ash through a special high-temperature, high-pressure steam treatment. So from our government's perspective, we would be interested to know how the key findings from the new blue paper would support or be consistent with our efforts to improve waste management and innovation, while not overly penalizing the important role played by plastics in our economy and society. So that's it from me at the outset, and I really look forward to the very good outcome of the blue paper number 5. And over to you, Dr. Struhtai.
Thank you, Excellency. Looking forward to see you at the Sherpa meetings again. And thank you for Japan's leadership on the plastic agenda, be that in the high-level panel, be it in G20, be it in ASEAN. Thanks a lot. Now, this is about the blue paper, and I would now like to ask Jenna Jambek. She is a professor at University of Georgia and a lead author of the blue paper, and Ellie Moss, a consultant and researcher and an expert that many of you have met when it comes to ocean pollution and to plastic, to present their findings. Jenna and Ellie, it's over to you.
Thanks, Martin. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's joining us from all over the world. Last I heard, it was from 54 countries for this paper launch. Second, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my co-authors for all of their efforts on this paper. Ellie Moss and Burjesh Dubey are both with us today, but there are also 11 other authors from around the world. It's been such an honor to work with everyone. The authors of this paper are from every continent outside Antarctica, and what is so awesome is that their perspective is in this paper, from the various contributions to the case studies to brainstorming about interventions and solutions. I'm so grateful for the wide variety of perspectives that contributed to the overall outcome of this report. Ocean pollution knows no boundaries. The ocean is the ultimate transporter, and so a global approach like the high-level panel to address it is needed. So I'd like to thank the high-level panel, the scientific leads, and all the people who will be helping to take this forward. As you've seen in the descriptions for this webinar, the notion that things can be thrown away is a myth. There is really no way for pollutants to go where they will not harm ecosystems, plant and animal life, and ultimately human life. Growing awareness of the harm of everyday plastic objects in the marine environment has made the general public a lot more aware, but we're still not solving the problem. Writing about and summarizing data on plastics in the environment and ocean is a bit of a moving target. This is a fast-growing scientific field with frequent new discoveries. We've been finding plastic everywhere we look for years now and know that it can endanger fish, turtles, seabirds, whales, and other marine animals while polluting beaches. Several other studies have now confirmed our 2015 work, estimating the range of plastic entering the ocean at about 5 to 13 million metric tons. This is equal to about a dump truck of plastic entering the ocean every minute. While previous estimates from the UN Environment Program estimate global damage to marine environments from plastic pollution costs a minimum of $13 billion a year, a new study by one of our co-authors found that damages to industries in the marine economy to be about $10.8 billion alone per year in just the APEC region, which is 21 countries, 21 economies that border the Pacific Ocean. I'm sure you saw this past week that sea spray at the ocean coast contains microplastic, which completely changes the thought of a nice day at the beach, even if it looks clean. And then we also heard, not surprisingly, when you sample smaller particles in the ocean, the number of microplastic particles found increases by an order of magnitude. A lot of attention has continued to focus on the visible plastic and cleanup on the surface of the ocean, but the best estimate is that only about 3% of the plastic going into the ocean every year is floating. We now know that there's more microplastic fragments underneath the surface, with newer research showing that there's about 1.9 million plastic pieces, or up to 1.9 million plastic pieces per square meter on the ocean floor. We didn't even get to include some of this new data in the paper as it just came out since the proofs were completed. So this is a highly dynamic science that has the world's attention, and it's not just plastic in our ocean. For this paper, we took a closer look at ocean pollutants beyond plastic discharged into the ocean from 4 major sectors that we focus on in the paper: municipal, agriculture, which includes aquaculture, industrial, and maritime. Municipal encompasses our everyday activities in both urban and rural settings. It's pollution from diffuse sources like stormwater, but also includes wastewater point discharges. Agriculture sources come from croplands for both food for us and for animals, livestock farming, and also aquaculture environments of farmed fish and other seafood. Industrial sources are often point discharges from production of materials and manufacturing of products and goods. And finally, maritime activities like commercial and recreational fishing, shipping, resource extraction activities, and cruising are potential pollution sources. The ocean pollutions we took a close look at beyond both the large plastic waste, including fishing gear, and microplastic include pesticides, heavy metals, oil and gas, non-plastic solid waste, antibiotics, parasiticides, and other pharmaceuticals, nutrients and industrial chemicals, including persistent organic pollutants. Some examples of discharges are pesticides from both agricultural and manicured lawn runoff, other solid waste ad hocly burned or buried, nutrients from agricultural runoff and untreated wastewater discharges, heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants in industrial discharges, and emerging chemicals of concern like antibiotics and pharmaceuticals in both treated and untreated wastewater discharges. For a detailed list of inputs across all sectors, you can look at Table 1 in the paper. So there are impacts from pollution entering the ocean across marine ecosystems, human health, and our economy. There are details in Table 2 in the report, and I went over some facts about plastic at the start, but I'm going to mention a few other things here. Abandoned fishing nets entangle numerous marine animals, and in the Gulf of Carpentaria and northern Australia alone, derelict nets have entangled more than 10,000 sea turtles. Major and extensive red tide, which is algae bloom, outbreak occurred along the coast of Hong Kong and southern China. Over 80% of the mariculture fish were killed, which equated to a loss of $40 million US. More than 100,000 miles of rivers and streams, close to 2.5 million acres of lakes, reservoirs, ponds, and more than 800 square miles of bays and estuaries in the United States have poor water quality because of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. So the premise of this paper is that increasing public attention to the problem of plastics in the ocean allows us to develop solutions that tackle the root cause of not only plastics, but of other pollutants that harm the ocean, our economies, and human health. So if plastic pollution is able to catalyze action on solutions, how can we use this as a gateway to tackle many pollutants at once? So we came up with 7 ways we think are effective and efficient at turning off the tap of not only plastic, but all ocean pollutants and moving us closer to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are 1, improve wastewater treatment, 2, improve stormwater management, 3, adopt green chemistry practices and new materials, 4, practice radical resource efficiency, 5, recover and recycle, 6, improve coastal zones, and 7, build local systems for safe food and water. So this table is a little complicated as it crosses all sectors, pollutants, and interventions, as well as all the Sustainable Development Goal targets that each intervention covers. But as a complex system, we want to illustrate how much each intervention is integrated across sectors and pollutants. So the breadth of pollutant coverage is shown by how many cells are blue underneath an intervention, and then where the cells are darker blue, that means there are more sectors covered by this intervention for this particular pollutant. So let's take a closer look at a few of these. Many contaminants end up in our wastewater system, and globally about 80% of our wastewater enters the environment without being treated still. So this intervention has wide coverage across pollutants and primarily across two main sectors, municipal and industrial, with also maritime for shipping, and agricultural treatment and runoff is covered under stormwater intervention. But this intervention also covers two SDGs, as developing wastewater infrastructure continues to be a pressing global need for sanitation. Green chemistry. Green chemistry crosses all sectors. It also has wide breadth, intersecting 6 of the 9 pollutants we looked at and 2 SDGs. This intervention includes the ban of toxic chemicals and policy ideas and concepts of biobenign materials and green engineering. This could really represent a paradigm shift in how we approach things, considering end of life and toxicity elimination at the design stage. Radical resource efficiency. This concept should not be radical, but it is right now. But it could become the norm. How can we decouple waste and pollution from economic growth? This intervention crosses 2 sectors and 5 pollutants along with 3 SDGs. This is where circular business models can shine and be supported, where we see fees on single-use items potentially, where concepts of zero waste live. How can we meet people's needs and livelihoods without producing waste or toxic chemicals in the first place? This intervention also connects to the 7th intervention of local food and safe water, where waste could be reduced with access to clean drinking water, for example. Recovery and recycling interventions. If a material is produced that needs to be managed, and let's not think of it as waste anymore, is a good start, and hopefully now it's non-toxic from green chemistry and green engineering, there does still need to be infrastructure to treat and manage these materials, aspirationally like nature, as an input into other processes. But waste management has fallen on the shoulders of communities even before it became formalized. So this intervention includes thoughtfully and inclusively designed extended producer responsibility to provide resources for managing materials at end of life, taking into account the 15 million people who currently work in the informal waste sector globally, as an example. This intervention crosses 3 sectors, 5 pollutants, and 5 SDGs, which is the most out of any of the interventions. So let's circle back to the interface of the land and the sea. When we think of pollution, this is often what we think of: a crowded beach, lots of people, the individual impacts that our activities have on this microsocial level. Often we may see litter or microplastic, and there's no doubt that collectively these do matter. All of this adds up. But when we think about interventions and making change, we encourage in this paper to take a wider approach. Zoom out, look at the bigger picture and see how all these different components fit together and contribute to pollution entering the ocean. It's all a big system with many similar root causes, and to change it, we need systemic change. The interventions that we present cross sectors, and you can see sectors: municipal, industrial, agriculture, and maritime in this image. And so we propose, can we change components of our system to address multiple pollutants at once? Improving wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, local foods, less intense agriculture, less plastic packaging, non-toxic chemicals, and integrated coastal zone management. The investments, partners, and resources grow when issues are approached without sectorial boundaries for the good of the ocean and people that depend on it. Because this is what we really want to see when we zoom way back in. Looking closely and even microscopically, a healthy and clean ocean that is the lifeblood of our planet, that without protection from pollution will continue to launch us further and further into unknown planetary and human conditions, and ultimately will be our own demise. But I'm optimistic we will heed this call. The high-level panel and extended partners, as well as anyone who agrees we need the ocean, will see the opportunity to address ocean pollution as an integrated and holistic way to preserve this critical 70% of our planet for the good of 100% of it and every living thing that is here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jenna. And all of your colleagues and all the co-authors for this very comprehensive paper. And also thanks a lot for squeezing such a comprehensive body of knowledge that goes all the way from microplastic to the big picture into 10 minutes, which is a tough one. You did that well. Thanks a lot. I would like to move us on into a panel now. And Ellie, I've introduced you. You have joined us. And I'd also like to introduce Rajesh Dubai now. He's a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur in India. He's also one of the lead authors of the paper. So welcome, Rajesh. And I would like to introduce Simon Reddy. He is the Director of International Environment at the Pew Charitable Trust, as most of you know, and in a long-term active player within the field of ocean science, the Pew Charitable Trust. Now, I will ask you a couple of questions. Let's see how that goes. We are all learning this new sport of doing panels on Zoom. Let's make sure it also starts to become a bit of a conversation. And then increasingly, I will also try to bring in the questions that the webinar audience is asking you. Ellie, can I start with you? The title is a long one, Leveraging Multi-Target Strategies to Address Plastic Pollution in the Context of an Already Stressed Ocean. I'm sure you've discussed that at length, and you've chosen this path between, on the one hand, writing a paper just about plastic, and on the other hand, writing a paper about all the pollutions. The paper talks about co-benefits between those pollutants. You want to talk about a bit about that? Why have you taken that focus for the paper?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. That's a fantastic question, and I think it's a great place to start. So the high-level panel challenged us initially to look at all of the pollution entering the ocean, and we thought this was really a fantastic challenge, because while plastic is certainly one of the most recent and one of the most visible pollutants that's entering the ocean, we really couldn't say that it's the worst. And I think one of the things that was really important for us to look at in this paper was, what is the larger context in which plastic is now entering the ocean? What else is going on? And so in looking at all of the other pollutants that Jenna ran through that are entering the ocean, plastic is just one of them. And just because it happens to be most visible doesn't necessarily mean it's the worst, but it does have the benefit of getting people's attention. And that's something that we think is a really interesting asset and a really interesting thing to take advantage of here. I also want to mention that all of these pollutants are entering the ocean in the context of climate change, and also in the context of, humans are increasingly seeking more and more food from the ocean. And each of those are addressed in their own blue papers. So we won't talk about those here, but I think that the context of the already stressed ocean, or the multiple stressors on the ocean, plastic and these other pollutants do have a cumulative effect. And so we really need to be looking comprehensively at all of these pollutants, which are all having detrimental effects on ecosystems, human health, and economies. The multi-target strategies, which are designed around this idea that some of the pollutants share pathways to the ocean, the reason they're so important, and the thing that we thought was most compelling about this idea of multi-target strategies, is that, just as it sounds like, it allows you to get the most impact per effort. So whether that's impact per dollar, if you're looking at investment in infrastructure or other types of solutions, or impact per policy, if you're looking to pass new policies, or even impact per communications message, if we're looking at shifting mindsets and helping shift cultures around better stewardship of our oceans. We live in a world with limited attention and limited resources and limited dollars, so we have to be really clever about how we tackle ocean pollution. And that's why targeting these shared pathways is so important. It allows us to address multiple pollutants efficiently and effectively while maximizing positive co-benefits. And in this case, co-benefits reflect a range of other positive outcomes beyond just reduced pollution. So Jenna mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. As we've shown in the paper, many of these interventions map to some of the specific Sustainable Development Goals, notably 2, 3, 6, 8, 11, and 12. So I think that really kind of I hope that unpacks the title a little bit.
Thanks a lot, Ellie. Are there some specific examples where these shared pathways sort of are getting very evident and easy to explain?
Well, it's a good question. So I think the shared pathways that we examined and identified in the paper, we chose 7 that we, as we looked across all the different possibilities, these are the ones that seemed to bring together the most kind of co-benefits and the most pollutants, in one strategy. So, Jenna mentioned wastewater treatment as one of the key pathways to the ocean. Is many pollutants are entering the ocean through the lack of wastewater treatment, whether that's sewage or other things. stormwater management is similar, but in the same, similarly, it's addressing a form of wastewater, but it needs to be managed in a very different way. It requires different interventions, but it also has, some really compelling evidence in terms of its potential effectiveness at reducing ocean pollution and also reducing, creating other positive benefits as well. One of the things that I think both of those, well, each of the strategies really makes them extra compelling is that when you have these interventions that maximize co-benefits and bring a lot of different positive outcomes to the table, that makes it possible to bring different stakeholders to the table. So it makes it easier to identify funding sources because you can tap into funding for water as well as funding for health, as well as funding for other forms of development, and as well as environmental protection and economic benefits. So you can really start to look at a range of different types of funding sources and different sort of funding that has different targets, but that can all be accomplished if they get brought together. Similarly with policy, you can bring together maybe unexpected alliances of stakeholders and groups of people who can unite around policies that can address where you have one policy that brings everyone together around these things. I think one thing I definitely want to highlight also though is while the issue of plastic I think many people gravitate towards how do we clean it up. I think we've really tried it in our 7 interventions here to address not just the end of life elements of these challenges, and in many cases pollution is an end of life issue, but it doesn't have to, not that it's an end of life issue, it shows up most acutely at end of life, but all of these problems are effectively design problems. And so we really need to make sure that as much as we try to sort of, stop the flow of pollutants into the ocean at the end of their lives or the end of their useful lives, really we need to be putting an equal or greater amount of energy and effort into designing solutions that don't create waste in the first place. I think one of the fundamental ideas here is that each of these things that we're putting in the ocean has value. These chemicals, these, plastic, nutrients, think about what we could grow with all the nutrients that are just flowing into the ocean. It's really an issue of wasted value. And if we could design solutions that don't waste that value, the ocean would be a lot cleaner.
Thanks a lot, Ellie. So we need better products, but until then, we have to make sure that we have collection systems. And even with those better products, we will still need them. Shared pathways in the form of stormwater management systems, waste water management systems, waste management systems, they sort of are a resounding theme throughout the report. Rajesh, that is a good moment to bring you into the conversation. So you work with cities and on smart city concepts in India, but also around the world on integrated waste management systems. So of course, we would like to understand from you, given how important they are as a shared pathway, what does it actually take to build a good one? And also in the context of this conversation, high-level panel for the sustainable ocean economy, would you design it differently with ocean pollution particularly on your mind, or would you do it exactly the same thing if the pressure point ocean wasn't so obvious? So Brajesh.
Thanks, Martin. Very interesting question. And thanks, Jenna and Ali, for setting the stage so that I'll be referring to their inputs as well while answering this question. So when you talk about a good integrated waste management system, so there is no rocket science. You start from the very basics, like you have to reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, which we have been listening for many, many years. And of course, you have to treat the waste, you have to recover, try to manage the waste, non-treatable one, and with the big goal of protecting the human health and the natural environment. That's kind of a classical textbook definition, very basic definition of an integrated waste management system. And when we look at what I have seen in terms of the working, as you mentioned, Martin, in different projects, that this involves local solution many times. It's a and we have to take into consideration the local needs and the local challenges. So, and then based on the different options out there, you mix and apply the most suitable waste management activities. So there is no one size fit all solution. What works in one area does not work in other area. For example, in a country like India, which is quite big, the rainfall is different in different parts of India. The kind of waste is also produced is a bit different. So to state further, say if you take a big city like Delhi and Mumbai and take all the food waste there and produce compost, you may not have enough market to sell those compost within that city area. So you may have to take the waste until maybe few hundred kilometers away, and all the benefit that you get out of making those compost actually is lost because of the transportation like a footprint. So that's why it's what is needed is to have a broad framework of federal and the local and the state guideline, but then come up with a local solution which also requires a decentralized approach, having the public-private partnership where having a multi-stakeholder. Waste management is also a behavioral issue. It's a highly multidisciplinary as we teach like waste and when we talk about waste, we all know that it's a highly multidisciplinary like approach is needed. So it requires policy intervention in terms of like a big framework from a federal level, but then it also requires what at the state and the local level, because you have to have technology has to work, economics has to work, and then operational challenges also has to be taken into consideration. So that's kind of when we have worked with several proposed smart cities in India, what we have found is in some places, some solution works, and the other places, some other solution. So anaerobic digestion may work in some place, composting may work in some place, or waste to energy, depending on the calorific value. So it's, in nutshell, I will say that with all the technologies had their market, but you need to select the proper technology based on the proper waste that you have. Waste has to be also clean to use that proper technology. Now, regarding your specific question regarding when considering ocean pollution, one of the most important aspect in terms of preventing the ocean pollution, as Ellie was also mentioning, that rather than having like an end approach, we have to be proactive. So when the product is designed, where it needs to be designed for recyclability, so that you can recycle it easily, rather than having some fancy product which is very difficult to take your plastic film, the cover on the bottle. So it becomes it becomes a nuisance for the plastic recycler. And at the same time, if you look at source segregation and collection of waste, because if you look at how the waste is getting into ocean, it is the leakage. It's mostly the leakages which is not being captured by the municipal solid waste system of the cities and towns along certain rivers and a stream. So that causes the leakage getting into the river and finally getting into the ocean. So if we can do a good job in terms of the source segregation and proper collection system, we will reduce the littering. And from a municipal solid waste perspective, I'm talking about, as well as plastic waste. And that will help to clean our, to keep our water bodies clean. And ultimately it will help in have the clean ocean, because all the water ultimately leads over there.
Thanks, Paresh. On a slightly more personal note, you have been working in integrated waste management for quite a while. And now we have a much bigger international discussion on ocean plastic. Are you looking at that and saying, look, this is the tailwind that you've always waited for? Or is this sort of the extra piece of activism, and sort of why didn't people get it in the first place?
Yeah, so like people are, if you look at it in terms of plastic, there are certain types of plastic which are kind of low-hanging fruit, which is easily recyclable. The problem comes is when we mix those multi-type plastics together in a product. When you have those filled plastic on the bottles, or you have different plastic types mixed together, and then it becomes an issue in terms of recycling. And if it doesn't get recycled, then of course it will end up in the ocean. So yes, it is getting a lot of news because of the plastic pollution that is happening, you can say, over the last 2 decades or so, and gradually it is more. We see that even with this ambassador mentioned about the COVID-19, already reports are out there. Yesterday there was I think BBC had a small video and the news article talking about we are already seeing waste from COVID-19 showing up in the French seacoast. So So those, of course, this raises a lot of awareness. Plastic is a like a, if used properly, it's a wonderful material. The problem is the mismanaged plastic, and the single-use plastic and the mismanaged plastic, which is kind of creating the issue. So of course it will raise awareness, and it will help us solve the plastic pollution in the ocean and also the other pollution as we are trying to highlight in this blue paper.
Yeah, and very quickly, sometimes we stand in front of this question of building waste management systems, and we feel utterly overwhelmed. There is 3.5 billion people have to be connected to waste management system by 2040. Sort of, Simon, you will probably talk to that in a moment. Your team has been working on that. That's such a big number. Rajesh, you have been working in countries like the US, like Canada, New Zealand, China, Nigeria. Help us. Where are the examples that give us confidence that you can actually build these systems fast enough?
So see, like most of the countries that you listed, except New Zealand, are pretty big countries. So there are good examples in some provinces and the states, but there may not be that good example in other provinces and states, depending on where you are. Even if you just take the US, some states, especially West Coast and East Coast, you will see they are being more proactive. And as you go to the south, maybe you see more and more landfilling showing up. So, but there are and there was also a push for shifting garbage overseas until this. We had this China sort policy a few years back, and then we started building our infrastructure back in these countries. So if you look at in terms of connecting, coming to space, like connecting people to the waste management, based on my experience, what I have seen in different countries is that when we start simple, rather than making it complicated, it starts simple, put a source. Number one thing around the world, if we can do the source segregation, if we can at least do the wet and dry. I keep on saying that, in fact, in all the talk that I do, that if you keep on wet and dry separate, then there are technologies which we can make use of. Like wet waste can be used for bioenergy and all that. And the dry waste can go to a material recycling facility. You can sort it out, and there are markets for each and every type of recyclables. Even like in India, we have several good examples of some educational campuses, some cities where people are doing it. Some of the areas of cities, we call it wards over here. Some wards in particular cities is showing they have doing that. One problem that we also see is that many places, especially in developing countries, things are very much personality driven rather than system driven. So we'll have one municipal commissioner who will be very active about it, and he will do it. Within 3 years, he gets transferred, and then the whole momentum gets lost. So that what we need to build. Like we need to build a small system with capacity, training of the manpower, who can run those facilities, and start with simple. Don't go to big, make Taj Mahal every time. We have to start simple and keep adding more to it. That's what I would say about that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rajesh. So you need to have leadership with perseverance. That brings us to Pew. Pew has been a long-term player in the ocean space, and more recently, it has also started to develop a Preventing Ocean Plastics program. You're representing Pew, and you're representing this program here, Simon. That's not the only reason why it's nice to reconnect and to see you, Simon. You want to talk a bit about what Preventing Ocean Plastic does as a program inside Pew?
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, let me first actually thank Ambassador Sukada, the high-level panel, and Jenna, Ellie, and Rajesh for the amazing report that they've done. We always used to have a saying early on in my campaigning career, which is dilution is not the solution to pollution. And clearly, unfortunately, a lot of people have thought it is, and this is why we find ourselves in the situation that we are today. And, you know, I very much agree there are some phenomenal problems in relation to leakage into the ocean, and not just of plastics. Plastics is simply the thing that we see, the thing that we can visualize. Unfortunately, a lot of the other pollutants going into the ocean we can't visualize. And so, you know, it is carried on for far too long. So plastics does provide us with this opportunity, I think, to communicate ocean pollution as a whole. In terms of Pew's work on preventing ocean plastics, We started work in 2018, very much on a research focus. Pew is very research driven, and we wanted to find more information about some of the types of plastic in the ocean and some of the routes by which it's going into the ocean, some of the solutions. We initially did a global policy analysis. This has been produced by Duke Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions, and is actually going to be released tomorrow. It's 20 years of government responses to global plastic pollution problems. And essentially, it's a study that aims to synthesize the policy response of governments to the global plastic pollution. So it's looking internationally, regionally, and nationally at the different policy mechanisms that have been put in place to date. The second and probably larger piece of work that we are due to release in the next 2 to 3 weeks is called Breaking the Plastic Wave, which has been done in partnership with Systemic, with Martin Schluchty's organisation, and also with support from Leeds University, Oxford University, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Common Seas. And this report is about a model that has been created, which evaluates the various strategies for reducing ocean plastic flows, and then quantifies the associated economic, environmental, and social implications of each pathway. As I said, we're looking to release that in mid-June, and hopefully in conjunction with a paper to be published in a science journal as well.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Quickly on the policy work. We have seen a lot of action recently. 114 countries have plastic bag bans now. So is this problem now starting to solve itself, or do you see a gap from your report?
No, unfortunately, it's a lot of the information coming out is showing that at the global level we've got non-binding commitments. At the regional and national level, so primarily what they call the European phenomenon, we do have binding commitments, but they tend to be aimed at specific uses of plastic, such as straws and plastic bags. And as the report that we've done with Systemic will show, we actually need a systemic solution, and I'm not picking on individual plastic problems. And the reality is that, and as I said, our report that's coming out, what it does show is that, commitments and government policies and corporate commitments between up to date actually make very little difference to the future projected increase of plastic going into the ocean. Obviously, I can't give the figures, but the clear indication is that we need more and more action by governments and businesses if we want to solve this problem. And that's not just in relation, I think, to plastics. I think some of the same outcomes can be applied to some of the other pollutants that Jenna, Burgess and Ellie have also been highlighting.
Thanks a lot, Simon. And let me go quickly back, Jenna, to you. The blue paper very much advocates that the visibility given to plastic can actually help us understand the ocean pollution problem more broadly. Why is it that sort of plastic already all of a sudden does the trick? What's so special about plastic being, as you showed us, sort of one pollutant amongst many?
Yeah. I think Simon touched on, this has been touched on a little bit, but I think, obviously this visibility, but not only the visibility out in the environment where you can see it as pollution, but it's so relative to our daily lives. I mean, it's literally, in our homes, in our kitchen, when we are looking at packaging every single day, when we are trying to decide, what do I do with this material now that I've used whatever was in it? Can I recycle it or not? And so I think that sort of just this daily interaction with the material, and then the image of seeing it in the environment as a pollutant, impacting the marine ecosystem, impacting the animals. When you see a whale with plastic bags in its stomach, and you have just used a plastic bag to bring home your groceries, that really absolutely brings this issue right, to home, where you can really understand how what we do as a society in general collectively then can impact our ocean. And so that visibility, sort of those visceral reactions, are what people can understand and really impact folks. And that's true then of all of those pollutants that we can't see that we're also talking about. The persistent organic pollutants, the nutrients, all of those things have these similar impacts, but the plastic is just so evident.
Yeah, thanks. It's really remarkable what the mobilization power of the plastic in the environment really has had in recent years. And some of us wish that something similar actually was happening in other environmental agendas like climate, etc., which sort of talks to the point how important it is actually to mobilize the people. You also you are a world-renowned scientist, I might say, but you're also in a way an activist or a change leader. There is an app that you created some years ago, which I think already has been elected as one of the most indispensable apps available, which is called the Marine Debris Tracker. I believe a lot in citizen science. Tell me a bit about, or tell us a bit about your story, or how why you helped create the Marine Debris Tracker, and what the impact has been.
Sure. So I think, and I've seen some of the questions even come through on the feed here. Some folks are asking, what can we do? And I think, as I was talking about the framing of this report, we really are, we're communicating to this high-level panel. We're talking about systemic change, big things that maybe people don't feel as empowered about, but that's not what we're trying to do here. I think people should feel empowered because they can communicate sort of up the chain. If you have some packaging and you can't, recycle it, communicate to the company that you're upset that this is a material that you can't do anything positive with. And so the Marine Debris Tracker is a mobile app that anyone can use around the world. It's free. We believe in open data and open science, so the data is open. But really, it's about collecting data. So for many, many years, the focus in this field was on cleanup, was on beach cleanups. And we now know that that's not the way to solve this problem. That's way at the end of pipe, right? That's sort of our last option before it gets to the ocean is this cleanup. And so we want to do all of these upstream changes. We want to prevent that plastic from getting there in the first place. But in order to do that, we need data. And obviously, as a researcher, that's something we know that we can utilize then to make decisions upstream. So what's been great about this mobile app is folks all over the world can collect data. We can use that data to say what is ending up here and why. So really, we ask these three questions: what is it? How did it get here? And what can we do about it? And if you think about those three questions about what you're finding, then you can work with other folks collectively, come up with solutions upstream and interventions that prevent the material from getting there in the first place. We've had over 2.5 million items that have been reported around the world. It continues to grow. We have partnerships now with National Geographic, and it's now sponsored by Morgan Stanley, which means we can have longevity in this field. We use it for scholarly research. We use it as a tool for collecting data on our sea to source expedition with National Geographic and our circularity assessment protocol. So it's not only just folks around the world, it's actual scientists and researchers that use this data, but everybody can contribute to it. So we hope that this kind of framework can help empower folks to really help and contribute to solutions.
Thanks a lot, Jenna. There's a wave of questions already coming in. So let me sort of go to a last question and let me perhaps pose that to all of you. We thought that we were launching this report at a nice event somewhere around the world and having some drinks and finger food afterwards. But here we are at a webinar and in the midst of a pandemic. So of course, everything we do and everything we think these days is linked to this new situation. And let me, of course, relate to that as well. Is this the worst or the best thing that could have happened in order to elevate ocean pollution? And which part of the report might be most related to the or most relevant to the post-COVID world that we are building? Perhaps let me go through one by one and hear your perspective. Ellie, any thoughts?
Sure. This is a critical topic right now. One of the things that I think has been really positive, if there are silver linings to come out of the COVID-19 crisis, is that it showed us a couple of things that we as humans are actually good at when we need to be. One example is hospitals realizing that the model of using disposable personal protective equipment, like disposable masks and disposable gowns, when they realized that they didn't have enough to be throwing them away, all of a sudden in multiple places we had these wonderful innovations that allowed the sterilization of this protective gear, which was always considered, to be something to be thrown away. And suddenly you had 80,000 masks being sanitized for reuse over and over again. And I think that realizing that the masks were actually valuable and important and not just something to be thrown away, and having that need to innovate and to create a way to use them over again is something that humans are so good at when we're motivated to be. And so I think that's something that we need to really look at as an example of that could happen with almost any of the resources we're using right now that are ending up in the ocean. If we recognize their value and we realize ways to reuse and recirculate them, we just need to know that it's important to do that. So I think that's one piece. I think another piece that's been really encouraging, again, recognizing that there's tremendous economic disruption and hardship globally around this pandemic, but the degree to which nature has rebounded so quickly, even just a month or two of fewer cars driving and fewer boats in the water and less production of various things happening. It doesn't mean that we should stop the economy. That's not the answer, but it does show that it's not too late, that if we can adapt our systems to do a better job of this, nature does have the ability to heal, and nature can recover from a lot of the damage that has happened. So I think COVID has given us just a wonderful little glimpse of, if we can start to fix these things, we actually do have a lot of ability to, the nature can come back. A lot of the things that feel as though they've been lost are not necessarily lost, or not yet at least. There's still time to act. I want to just talk specifically about, quickly, sorry, I hope I'm not taking too much time, but it's very discouraging to see that already we have masks, and other disposable sort of plastic protective equipment washing up on beaches in larger numbers than anything in places they shouldn't be. So I think that the idea that somehow plastic is protective is something that we need to take head on. We've already seen that this particular virus actually lasts longer on plastic than it does on other surfaces. And people have sort of started wrapping things in plastic that they never would have wrapped in plastic before, thinking that somehow it's going to make us safer. And I think we can see that that's not true. And that's a sort of a narrative that needs to be disrupted as well. So those are just some initial thoughts. So I just didn't answer your question directly, but I think that this actually can be a turning point in how we think about how we use resources and how we think about plastic and some of these other things. And it really can provide an optimistic and hopeful perspective of how we can go forward.
Rajesh, you talked about how there's increasingly face masks also in India's plastic dumps. What's your perspective?
Yeah, so with the COVID, of course, we will see some increase in the waste, not the plastic waste as well as other waste stream we are seeing because of the broken supply chain. Like if you look at, we had the lockdown in many countries, the trucks were stuck on the highways, so many of the perishable item became a waste. It didn't come to our dinner plate. Before that, it actually need to be thrown away. So food waste also went up. So that's not only, so plastic, of course, in the COVID with all those PPEs and other stuff, you will see more plastics coming out. And many of those biomedical related plastic waste, of course, that needs to be treated as a biomedical waste. But when we talk about packaging, which again, unfortunately, although as Ellie also mentioned, it's not the safe way to keep us safe from the virus, because it does stick on plastic, virus does stick on plastic for a longer time. But that will come because of the human nature. We will see some of more packaging, more online shopping, and that will lead to more packaging waste coming into the stream. So again, we have to somehow keep it separate so that we can recycle them. So if we can do the segregation, which I keep on telling again and again, that will definitely help. And in terms of the positive side of COVID, we have seen some effect in India. In River Ganges, we saw dolphins showing up in Calcutta area, which was unnatural to see. At least in my lifetime, we have not heard about it. So. And we have also seen water to be cleaner because most of our industries were closed. So as our report mentions that there are multiple sources of pollution to the ocean. So if all those industrial discharges and other activities, because of, unfortunately, because of this reason of COVID, but it does help in terms of keeping the pollution low in surface water, which of course will lead to the ocean pollution as well. So that's what my take will be on that in terms of the impact.
Simon, where are you on the scale between very optimistic and very pessimistic on COVID and plastic?
I think it presents a number of challenges. I very much agree with the previous speakers. The need to combat some of the misinformation, especially around COVID-19 and plastic, and certainly the increase in plastic. I think the positives for me, though, are, I think it has shown we can be much more efficient. Certainly in the UK, what we've witnessed is, shortages of PPE, which is like personal protective equipment, which has led to recycling, as Ellie highlighted. We've also seen incredible innovation, companies coming together and designing new equipment and actually producing new ventilators in a matter of weeks, when normally it would have taken months, even years, to design these things and get them approved. And what we've also seen is global cooperation. And these are the sorts of things that we need to tackle some of the ocean problems that we've got: efficiency, innovation, and cooperation. We're not going to solve these problems acting in isolation, either nationally or even regionally. They're global problems, and they need global solutions. And so I guess these things do give me hope that we can bring these things together and we can work collectively and find solutions to these problems, and find solutions quickly.
Jenna, of course, I'd also like to hear your Corona perspective, but perhaps I can also use that and start moving us into the questions of our audience. There's a question from Alex Matthew that is linked to the question of what kind of plastics for what kind of purpose are we bringing out? Has there been a correlation established between the value of plastic and the amount reaching the ocean, i.e. Are low value plastics more prevalent in ocean pollution? A lot of what the plastic that we see now coming through COVID is of course also very specially designed for in-use, but poorly designed for post-use. Jenna, can you take that package?
Yep, sure. I would say, so to quickly touch on COVID, there's been great answers so far, but was really evident to me when we started using the daily PPE, how quickly masks and gloves, started ending up in the environment, in grocery store parking lots and things like that. And this is people, taking photos, logging with Marine Debris Tracker, and telling us about this. And so that was like maybe a week in time, if that. So it really provided that evidence of sort of what we do. So the negative is sort of like what we do ends up leaking out, but that also means that if we can change, it means if we change things upstream, then that will have that impact. So there was that immediate sort of direct relationship to what we're doing as a society and what sort of ends up on the ground, and of course the need for those at this time. I think Simon did a great job of highlighting innovation. I don't want to say universities. Similarly, students got together, innovators were making masks that were needed. And I think we also really saw the need for science, and we're still seeing the need for science, the need for models, the need for data as we make decisions going forward. This is, I mean, I'm constantly checking, you know, models and data to see what it is that we need to do. What I personally want to do and what we need to do as a society, whether or not how much open we can be. And so I think people really are seeing the need and the importance of science in our lives. So that sort of leakage component leads to that next question. And I would say that answer varies. So I've collected data on litter many places around the world, and certainly I would say in general the less value plastic ends up in our environment, and therefore has a higher chance of entering the ocean. If it does have value, it is often collected, but especially where you see the informal sectors, and Dubey referred to this quite a bit for India. And having spent several months there last year on the ground collecting data as well, we saw this. So primarily it's film plastic, things that the multi-layer material team mentioned that don't have this value. And in other places, the value without informal sector, it doesn't have as much impact on sort of what ends up in our environment. It could be related to infrastructure and convenience, on various other things. So I would say there is some variability between economic status, demographics, and various other situations, but in general, around the world, the low value material ends up leaking out more.
Thanks, Jenna. Let me go to you, Brajesh. There's a question from Robin Barakala, and sort of he puts us in front of a very stark choice. Where are we heading in regards to the outputs of the initiative looking at our response to plastic pollution, whether we will champion EPR and recycling approach in private-public partnerships, or should we be banning plastic altogether because of the pollution? And even if EPR was the right answer, do we have enough time to build it? How to deal with that question?
Ban, I'm not, like if you look at the bans typically does not work very well in many places unless you have a proper alternative. So if you ban plastic, there has to be alternative to that plastic material. And if the alternative is there, which gives all the same function, similar function than plastic, similar function as compared to plastic at an economically competitive price, then ban may work. But otherwise, bans does not really work for most part. Of course, those single-use plastic, those straw and those stuff which is creating a lot of nuisance, I see value of banning some part of plastic, but I don't see banning plastic like in general, because there are a lot of things. Plastic has done a lot of good things as well. If you look at your automobiles today, they have made the automobile lighter, and that increases your fuel consumption, like the basic fuel efficiency. So it's not that plastic is always the bad boy. It also does a lot of good stuff too. So what we have to do is have proper plastic waste management system, and that's where the EPR comes in picture. EPR, how you implement EPR. EPR is a wonderful concept, but the implementation of EPR is always becomes challenging. From a developing country's perspective, what I have seen is more emphasis is given, like as if the PepsiCo and other companies have to get those potato chips and do it themselves. They are experts in making potato chips and cold drinks. They are not experts in waste management. So what is needed is getting money from them and having a waste management company do the job, which is their expertise. So EPR, if implemented properly, is going to, basically EPR should be used to get them revenue, and that revenue should be used to help those upcoming waste management companies to develop their infrastructure, like they have done. Like if you look at the Ontario Stewardship Program, which that's what they're in Canada, that's what their kind of thought process, where they were trying to get the money. And many countries are doing it for electronic waste right now, where you pay those disposal fee, and that disposal fee is used to build up e-waste infrastructure. So it's not that that company which is producing plastic is responsible for managing plastic waste, but it is the other companies which are managing plastic waste, but the money indirectly comes from those plastic manufacturers.
Help us understand that a bit better. So it sounds like such an evident, straightforward concept that you pay with every ton of volumes that you put on a market. And here there are countries on the one hand, which sort of can't imagine that there is a world without EPR. It's almost like a world without traffic lights. And then there are some other industries and other countries that consider it very, very hard to move to an EPR system. Sort of why are they two very different views on EPRs?
Like EPR, in terms, again, as I said, concept-wise, it's okay, but the implementation, when you go, then it becomes a challenging. For example, if you look at in Indian context, our waste regulation, which was revised in recent past, has that EPR concept got built in. Whether you talk about electronic waste, plastic waste, in all those we have this EPR concept. But the problem comes because there is no company out there which can do the job of plastic recycling. Like how will you collect? The collection systems. Municipality does not have a collection system where this waste is collected in a source segregated way. So now you have this mixed municipal solid waste coming in, and from that, how we'll get those potato chips back out? So and then all the value gets lost of those. So unless if the ULBs, the urban local bodies, or the municipalities, or the city government, whatever we call it at different parts of the country, distant part of the world, if they have a proper waste collection infrastructure, then implementing EPR kind of comes in play, because you don't have basic infrastructure to even implement EPR. That's why you get those kind of response. And to expect that company which are producing those potato chips can do the job for collecting the garbage as well as managing the garbage, it's not their expertise. So they may try to do it, but they will not do a good job on that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Look, that's a very interesting outlook. If someone was looking at that with the perspective of an environmental services company, so there's a lot to be built. Let me move forward. In one of the benefits, Ellie, you kindly explained sort of why this is a report about plastic, but it's also a report about ending ocean pollution, and how those two or how those are sharing different pathways and deserve multi-target strategies. Let's take advantage of the work that you've done. And Jenna, perhaps quickly back to you. That's your area of expertise. Chirag Bhimani is asking, while we talk of microplastic in the ocean environment, but then there are deep sea discharge of industry effluents, which would react with the plastic and create a new problem. So what did you find, or what did you know about the interaction of different types of contaminants or pollutants? Jenna, can I throw that to you?
Okay. All right. I'll quickly address that, and then Ellie, you can comment as well. So we did. So we looked a lot at the multiple pollutants coming in and the industrial discharges. Probably the most research on sort of interaction there would be on the persistent organic pollutants that sorb to the plastic, and that's been looked at for a long time. Sort of even the industrial discharge of the plastic resin pellets themselves have been studied. And certainly those concentrates and those persistent organic pollutants It means then if any of those pellets are floating, it can be a transport mechanism. We know animals consume some of the plastic that is contaminated with the persistent organic pollutants. What we don't really know is because those are in the environment as well, it's sort of a complex transport mechanism, right? Because the animals are being exposed to the POPs within the water itself, as well as the plastic. So actually, depending upon the concentration in the animal itself, it could pull some contaminants out, or potentially there has been research showing that the animals would be impacted by the POPs if they hadn't already been exposed to them. So it's it plays a complex role. Also we kind of touch on here a little bit, but it's touched on in other blue papers, invasive species. So plastic can act as a raft for microbes. Now I think especially related, people are thinking about viruses related to COVID. So I think, this is a new surface and material in the environment where it wasn't at all. There wasn't anything there. There's a carbon source there. How is it impacting the biogeochemical cycling of the ocean? There's a lot of research questions to be looked at still with, just having as much plastic as we do within the surface, as well as the entire water column and depth of the ocean.
Thanks, Jenna. There is a question from Ariancia Sumardi, and I hope I'm getting this right. What's about the effectiveness of beach cleanups? What do you think? And sort of, I think we see what's behind this question. Are they just a waste of time, and are they a distraction from the more systemic answers? Or is it exactly what some of you called for, the mobilization of the people? So Simon, I know that you have a campaigning career behind you. Let us hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think beach cleanups are absolutely great. I think they're really, really important. They're important to the local community because they want to have their beach free of plastic and not be able to go to their local beach and see it covered in plastic. They're also a great way, I think, of communicating the problem to a wider audience. It's about basically, being able to communicate to our younger generation about what's going on, and to be able to communicate locally to local politicians, local policymakers, that there is a problem and that people are prepared to go out there and act. Obviously, it's not going to solve the overall problem of plastic going into the ocean. As you rightly pointed, that's a more systemic, fundamental issue that we need to address on a larger scale globally with policymakers and with corporations. But in terms of highlighting the issue, communicating the issue locally, and giving people a real sense of purpose to make their local environment free of plastic, then it's an extremely good idea.
Ellie, any thoughts on this one? Beach cleanups? Ellie?
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, there you are.
Okay, good. I agree with Simon that the beach cleanups have a role to play. I think it is a tangible thing that we can all do that's beneficial to our communities and does give us that up close and personal experience of the severity of plastic pollution. And so I think it's a really important awareness raising tool. Where I think we need to be careful is I've observed that one of the things that seems to resonate most with people is this idea of cleaning up the ocean. And I'm seeing it in the Q&A. We've had multiple questions about, well, how do we clean this up? And we've seen millions of dollars invested in various technologies. How can we clean up the ocean? How do we clean the plastic up? And that I think is really, unfortunately, misguided, where it's coming from, I think, a really great place of intention. I think people really want to help. But when you look at, how much it costs to try to recover plastic from the ocean, it is orders of magnitude larger than if you were to put those same resources, energy, time, attention, talent, money, if you put those towards designing better solutions on the front end, or even just better waste management processes on land, you get so much more impact. So I think, unfortunately, this desire to clean up and to put resources towards, whether it's boats that clean up, or whatever the sort of technology is, bins, whatever, I think it's a distraction. I think it's an unfortunate distraction at this point. So while I think You know, we all want to do what we can, and there's a sort of desire to clean up the ocean. The best way to clean it up is by not putting trash in the first place.
Thanks for that. We've talked a lot about the environment, but we started off saying that also the HLP is motivated by the SDGs more broadly. Here's a question from Freya Tuli. You mentioned the harmonization of this work with several SDGs. Where do you see the biggest benefit of ocean pollution intervention or to poverty alleviation, or otherwise the biggest opportunity to combine improved ocean health with a reduction of poverty? So I'm giving this to all of you. Perhaps we start with you, Brajesh.
Yes. So if you look at this ocean pollution, of course, that is impacting the fisheries community. If I talk about like India has a long sea coast, if I just take the example from the Indian context, all those fisheries communities, when they go out fishing, we are seeing more unwanted material than the fish in those nets. So that is one area where preventing this ocean pollution will help in terms of getting better productivity for those fishermen. And as we just before we talked about these beach cleanups are required because we are seeing that our beaches are getting dirty because of all these plastics and other waste getting in there. So, and then that becomes unusable for people like me who would like to go there and enjoy time with my family. So those are the stuff where I would see these kind of going to help in terms of if we can reduce the ocean pollution and help in those aspects of sustainable development goals.
Thank you. Someone else? The poverty link.
So I think the two that I would highlight, and we actually, you know, we've mapped them. So in the report, again, you know, you can see specifically which SDG targets are most connected or aligned with each of the interventions. Interestingly, radical resource efficiency and recover and recycle have the most in terms of number of targets that align with them, I think because they have broad implications. But the ones that I would really highlight are number 7, which is building local systems for safe food and water, and number 1, which is improving wastewater management. And I think those two have a particular alignment with sustainable development objectives. When we look at, you know, building local and regional systems for safe food and water, I think it's fairly self-evident why that's so critical for development. You know, those are just, you know, absolutely foundational to what it means to, you know, be able to lead a safe and healthy life. Interestingly, you know, the work that would be done there could alleviate enormous amounts of pollution to the ocean also. So I think that really is sort of one of the key win-wins. I think it's also interesting to note that, at least here in the United States, one of the learnings from the COVID crisis has been that the globalization of the food chain, of the food value chain, has become a vulnerability. And one of the main calls, and sort of as a, you know, building the resilience of the food system has been to, you know, really strengthen regional food systems, which I think aligns really nicely with what we would want to see from both a development perspective as well as a circular economy perspective. It's a lot easier to do the circular economy regionally than it is to do it globally. And cost effectively. So I think that's a really important piece. We've already talked quite a bit about wastewater management, but I think that also both has important development implications as well as it highlights some of the importance of the current moment with COVID. Untreated wastewater is an enormous health hazard, an enormous challenge for hygiene. So it's really an important development, you know, a step in development is to have wastewater treatment and sanitation services be more broadly available. There's also a whole host of other benefits that go along with treating wastewater. But importantly, you know, when you have untreated wastewater, especially sewage that's not properly managed, that's ripe for the transmission of disease. You know, we think of COVID as primarily a respiratorily transmitted disease, which is absolutely right. And I don't know that we know the science on it in relation to other forms of transmission, but I do know that with SARS-1, the original SARS, you know, people continued to shed virus in their species for at least a month after having the virus. And so we know that that could be another possible vector of transmission if we don't have appropriate sanitation and management for sewage. So I think those are the two that I'd really highlight as being priorities both from an ocean pollution perspective, but also, you know, just massive, massive benefits both for human health and for the Sustainable Development Goals broadly.
Thanks a lot. There are lots of questions coming in. We could continue to do this forever, but I think we slowly need to come to close. Perhaps one more question. You convinced us pervasively that there is a positive environmental return to the end of pollution, ocean pollution. You convinced us that there is a significant SDG or sustainable development return when we end ocean pollution. What about the economics? Is there a return if we do that? That takes us, of course, into deep waters. Thomas Baker, I might take your question. Companies also lightweight plastic packaging materials, but it's done for cost reduction. It's not done for reducing waste. And isn't that a serious issue? Because it just because it's virtue signaling, and how to overcome this economically and systematically, as Simon has stated. So, Simon, this is a tough 1 minute question, but still, what needs to happen for clean oceans to be an interesting business case for packaging and consumer goods companies?
Well, thank you, Martin. It's a good question. I think what we need to start with is the realization of what happens if we do nothing. Doing nothing is not an option. Our report that we're going to release in June, again, I can't give the figures, but it does have a business as usual projections between now and 2040. And they really are quite astounding in terms of the projected increase in plastic and the projected leakage to our ocean. And then, of course, with that will come the implications, the economic implications of that ocean degradation, which have just been highlighted. You know, it's not just impacts on wildlife, it's impacts on whole habitats, which then have economic implications for the people that rely on those habitats for a whole range of economic activities, from the basic sort of supply of food to supply of fresh water to the amenity usage to tourism, etc., etc. So it's not just focused on the developing world, it's focused on the developed world as well. The other thing I think is important that we consider is that every time, or unchecked, this problem is going to become more and more visible. And so consumer goods or companies also need to recognize what impact that's going to have on them. This is not like some flash in the pan environmental concern that if they keep their heads down, it'll go away. It's not. It's going to get worse. It's going to increase. And the public is going to be reminded again and again of the problem. And so I think companies have to ask themselves whether or not they want to be part of that, or whether they want to be part of finding a solution to that. Just like that great saying, you know, do you want to be at the top table eating, or do you want to be at the top table or eaten by the top table? And I think that's the decision that needs to be made. So for me, the economic arguments are both in terms of amenity, they're both in terms of social issues, in terms of countries' economics and wealth, but also the economics of those companies that actually want to see a solution. And I think the pioneers and the first mover companies will be recognized for the contribution that they could make to sorting this problem out.
Thanks a lot, Simon. That was a very comprehensive way also and a very conclusive way to come to the end of this conversation. Now, the HLP and the wonderful WRI team have asked me to offer some thoughtful reflections as we close, but unfortunately, I've been listening to all of you, so I'm not sure whether I found that far too interesting, but perhaps very, very briefly, I think here are, if I think about it, here are 3 points. The first one is, it's a good idea to expose plastic as a pollution problem, because that is the iconic application that will teach us to deal with materials and resources and waste altogether, that we have to move from linear to circular. So I think that's something that came out very strongly through all of you. Then secondly, I heard, and Simon, you just said it, this is not done by just by better waste management systems. This is a systems and paradigm shift where we need to go all the way from questioning the way we produce and consume, and how we design products and value chains in the first place. This is nothing that you actually fix at the tailpipe. And then lastly, we heard that the COVID crisis, with all its additional hygienic plastic input and with all the financial constraints and some of the suffering, is of course not a context that we could wish for. But now that we have it, it's also a reset and a moment of re-reckoning that will allow us and offer us degrees of freedom to build systems and value change that are compatible with the health of our ocean. And that's also something that came strongly through very strongly. Now, you should read the full paper. As always, science doesn't hurt. Science is helpful, particularly in these times. Here's the paper, download it. It's very well written. I can really recommend it, and you will recognize a lot after today's conversation. And then the last thing I wanted to say, please stay close to the higher level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. There will be more of these webinars and talks as we go along. And you have the moment, you have the opportunity to invite yourself into them. There is a whole schedule of discussions. There's a whole schedule of more launches of blue papers that those of you on the call will all find very interesting. That's it, 90 minutes. Thanks a lot, all the organizers, the high level panel, the co-authors, the panel members, and thank you for joining, and be safe.